Hello, my name is Lars Christian Bentsen. I'm going to show you how I tie this mayfly imitation. The season is just around the corner. The first hatches will probably be on in 10 or 12 days. And there are plenty of mayflies imitations to choose from. This one is one that I've compiled with inspiration from many different flies. The point of this one is that it's tied with simple and ordinary materials, and it's durable, and the key point is that it maintains this very significant profile with a good footprint and the upright wing sloping backwards a little bit. It's a relatively simple tie, so let me show you how I do it. I'm using the Ahrex FW538, which is really a sedge hook, but it has a good profile and the right size. We also have the 538, 539, which are dedicated mayfly hooks. They are a little bit thinner in the wire, so just remember that when you're fishing it. All right. I use an ordinary olive tying thread, which I attach to the hook, remove the waste, and carry on down to a point roughly where the barb would be if it wasn't a barbless hook. For the tails, I use this material called faux bucktail, which is, well, it's supposed to be a fake bucktail, but it's very nice for mayfly tails. And I separate 3, which it did by itself, and I have 4 there, I see, which of course doesn't matter. Fish don't care, but I do. Separate them, make sure they are roughly the same length. We can always adjust them later. A little bit longer than the hook gap, don't make them too long. That'll only cause the fish to, when it takes, they can push the fly forwards and not really get it in their mouth. So don't make the tails too long. Tie them in before you tie them down too hard. Just make sure that they don't have to be the exact same length, but yeah. Carry on tying these down up the hook shank. Tie off the waist, cut off the waist, and come back down. Now I want to splay the tails and make sure that they stay splayed. This can be a little bit tricky operation. You need to get them separated before we tie them into position so they stay there permanently. So it's a little bit tricky, but it's worth it because it also helps the fly to float upright and not keel over. So there's the far one separated. Come in between the far one and the middle one with the tying thread. Separate the one closest to me from the middle one. Give it a little pull. Tricky, as I said. Can be difficult to see which one is actually the near one. I think we've got it there. Just support the thread with a finger and pull it in between the near one and the middle one. Tighten it down, and then finally 1 or 2 turns underneath all 3 tails. And that will lock them into position. Come up the hook shank again. For the rib I'm using a GSP thread. You can use many other materials. The point is that I just want it to be strong and lightweight. I'm going to double this one but you might not have to. That depends on how thick the thread is. Now be careful when you come down again that you don't tie over the tails and ruin the splay. I use fly right poly seal, but you can use any dubbing as long as it has the right color. I like the poly seal because it gives a little bit of a rough body. Now when dubbing, just don't use too much at the time, and you can get almost any dubbing to stick to the thread without much difficulty. A little bit at a time. Now remember that the mayflies, the Ephemera Danica, actually are big and fairly bulky insects, so you don't have to be very sparse, but as always with a dry fly, don't overdo it. We're going to leave a little bit of space up here for the thorax and the hackle and the wing. And now I just rip the fly fairly evenly, ripping it in the opposite direction of my tying thread, so the rip becomes a little bit more visible. There we are. Now for the hackle. You can use almost any hackle. You can use a cheap Indian cockneck like this one, or you can use one of these more webby hen hackles. And contrary to old wisdom, hen hackles are actually quite good for dry flies, especially with the modern floatants, because this webby hackle actually holds floatant very well. So I separate out the fibers and remove what I don't need. I'm going to tie this in by the tip. And if I wound the full hackle, it would be way too dense, so I remove one side. Now I tie counterclockwise, so I remove this side. If you don't tie counterclockwise, you of course have to remove the other side. The point is to leave what you'd call the leading edge free of fibers. Now cut a small triangle and tie it in. Now for the thorax. I use this fly right number 34, but again it can really be any kind of dubbing. This one I like fly right, and this one has the right color. So once again I dub a little bit at a time, and that should be about right. Wind the thorax, a little bit heavier than the body, a little bit thicker, just a little bit more here, but remember to leave a little bit of space behind the hook eye. Now I'll simply wind the hackle, and I'm going to use up all the hackle. Just make sure that you get a full turn at the back, and then wind forward, slightly open turns, so that when you get to the front, you have a full turn left, so to speak. Tie that off, a few extra turns, and cut off the waist. Now, in the interest of simplicity and cheap materials, I'm just going to use a standard poly yarn for the wing. It floats well and it's extremely durable. You can use many other synthetic fibers if you have something like Cetlon or others. They also work very well. I'm going to mix this because a mayfly wing isn't white, it isn't olive either. So I'm going to mix these and get a little bit closer to that semi-transparent olive yellow look that the mayfly wing has. And in order to do that, I just use a small comb and separate the fibers like that. Now I'm going to start with the white, and I'm probably going to end up using maybe half the amount of white half the amount of olive compared to what I have in white. And then to blend, I simply pull apart and lay them back together. And you don't have to do this forever, just until you get a fairly good blend. Just comb it together to take a look. That looks all right. Now I'm going to, the ends are of course not straight after blending it, but I'm actually just going to leave them like that and use that for the first part of the wing. Now when I tie this in, I don't want it to have the full length of the wing. The wing is going to be about that long, so I'm going to leave it, let's say, about 1/2 centimeter short. About the same length of the hackle. Tie that in. Make sure it's tied in well. Come back a little bit. And now move forward and tie it in right up behind the hook eye. And leaving that little bit of space, which I am going to dub out with a little bit of the same dubbing that I used for the thorax. And this is completely unnecessary. It's just a quick, fun little way of actually producing a head. And you see I dubbed from front to back, and I leave the tying thread right in front of that first part of the wing. Now simply fold back, pull fairly tight. Make sure that you don't catch any of the hackle. A couple of turns of tying thread. A quick whip finish. And if you want, you can, I just pull that until it breaks. That makes sure that the knot is tightened as hard as you can. You can give it a little bit of varnish, but I never do that. Now I'll have to trim this wing, of course, to the right length. And in order to give it a fairly good natural profile, I just start by separating out the fibers. And then small cuts, a little bit at a time, making sure to trim so it gets a fairly good profile. That's about it. Take care not to cut off too many of the hackle fibers. Now, in order to give the fly a good footprint and make sure that it sits upright when it lands on the water, I'm going to trim the hackle flush on the underside. Before I do that, just make sure that I don't cut off all the fibers. Look from the front, trim. You can also turn it in the vise, trim. What you actually have to be careful about here is not to leave any fibers that point downwards, because that'll very easily tilt the fly over. I usually have a small pair of scissors in my vest, so if I haven't trimmed it perfectly here in the vise, I can always cut out 1 or 2 fibers when I'm on the water. So there it has a nice flat bottom, has a good profile, it lands well on the water, it floats well. It's extremely durable, and it's tied with just standard cheap fly tying materials. I hope you like the fly.